Hey, welcome to Lab, the podcast, back in 2025 with poet Wendy Kieffer. Wendy, it's so good to be back. We are surviving Arctic Blast 2025, 9 inches of snow in Pensacola when we were, the day that we're recording this, which is crazy. How are you doing? Did you have to shovel snow to get here?
Oh yeah, this took me hours. I love it. I keep saying I love the cold. I love after that long summer that never
Yes.
ended until what was it? Late
Yesterday. Yeah.
to like late October. I was just so ready. So it's still something I'm celebrating.
Yeah.
Yeah, just bundling up.
It's pretty wild. I think it is a once in a lifetime snowstorm or something that they've
Right.
said for accumulation for Florida. And one of the kids was showing me pictures of kids sledding on snow in Florida. And I thought these are
Yeah.
two, I didn't know we had hills and I didn't know that we had snow. Like two things that I was not
Wow.
aware that happened in Florida,
That's
both
funny.
happening. Yeah. 2025, that's also weird to say, regardless of the
Mm-hmm.
snow, but the presidential inauguration just happened. We're
Mm-hmm.
deep into January. How are you and your family doing? What are you feeling this part of 2025 so far? You optimistic, hopeful, energized? What are you feeling?
Maybe a little combination of things. I always feel kind of excited to have that blank new slate of a new year. And we took some time as a family to reflect on 2024. It's become our little tradition is saying,
Okay.
okay, well, where have we come from? What did we accomplish? What would we like to change? And kind of vision casting. But the sickness was running through our house, and so that was derailing. And you're kind of just clawing through, trying to, get situated after a sickness with kids.
Yeah.
But yeah, I always get energized by the idea that, okay, fresh new start. What are we going to do?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like that is probably you all who are listening feel similarly. There's such a beautiful season of Advent,
Yeah.
especially the V3 community and everybody listening. We're trying to be thoughtful about that season and slow. And the more you do that, the more you make that turn into January. And it really does feel like you enter a new season.
Yeah.
And some of that comes with a lot of joy and optimism and excitement. And I think some of that feels like there can be a dip too, right?
Yeah,
Like you
that's
can
true.
feel a lull or an energy pull back. But
Mhm.
regardless, it's good. And there's a hopefulness, I think, to a new season and seeing what God will do. 2024 was amazing for V3. We've said that in so many different venues. So I want to say thank you to just all of our partners, everybody in the listening community, this V3 community that really is stretching over the whole world now. There's people in so many different places around the world listening and being a really meaningful part of this community. So thank you to our partners. Welcome if you are new and you're just jumping into a new podcast for 2025. Poetry is a part of the regular cadence of Lab the podcast. And so that's why we're so excited to have Wendy with us. I can't remember when we started that. Riley maybe can get us the data on that, but we've done this now for a while. And the cadence is typically selecting a particular poem.
Mhm.
This month is National Human Trafficking Awareness Month. And so it's a cause and an issue deeply important to V3 because of the issue, but also just on the human level. And
Yeah.
I want to read you something before you introduce the poem that you chose for this moment, because just coming out of December at V3, we have this tradition of reading The Grandest Miracle from Lewis, his reflection on the incarnation.
Mm.
And this is what he says. I love this. He says, in the Christian story, God descends to reascend. He comes down from the heights of absolute being into time and space, down into humanity, down to the very roots and seabed of the nature he has created. But he goes down to come up again and bring the ruined world with him.
Mm.
One has the picture of a strong man stooping lower and lower to get himself underneath some great complicated burden. He must stoop in order to lift. He must also almost disappear under the load before he incredibly straightens his back and marches off with the whole mass swaying on his shoulders. Isn't that beautiful?
Wow.
That's how we end the year in December. And then we turn to January, National Human Trafficking Awareness Month. And that
Mm.
light and joy of that good news does dive back down. And
Mm.
that's part of the invitation. of the gospel, right? That
Yeah.
it is this glorious good news because it descends all the way down to stoop and lift us up. And so
Mm.
all month we're having conversations about the life and beauty of the gospel because it does go all the way down, as
Yeah.
in Lewis's words, to stoop and get underneath the thing that needs to be lifted up. And that's why it's
Mm.
good news for the broken and the oppressed and the hurting and the lonely
Yes.
and those who are in captivity. And so we've stretched the whole month out and we thought, let's keep that conversation going through
Mm.
poetry. So what's the poem that you chose
Mm.
to kind of help us do that?
Yeah, well, I was looking at such a wide range of poems because when I was thinking and meditating on the human trafficking awareness, I thought, well, there's just this lack of freedom. There is a exploitation. There is hopelessness. There is pain. There is so many aspects. Even just poems on empathy. I think I sent you too.
Mhm.
Just feeling what other people are feeling can be a great catalyst for change. And so there was such a wide variety, and nothing really seemed to click until I sent you this Christian Wiman poem. It's just called Prayer. It's a very simple, sparse but compact poem, and it really centers around pain, pain, and that feeling. And it's interesting that you started with that. I didn't know you were going to read that
Mhm.
C.S. Lewis, but the poem actually does descend down.
Mm,
The whole poem takes this big descent down.
mm,
Um, before it rises up again at the end. And so that's a perfect intro to
mm,
go with this. But I think there is that idea that, well, something it is universally felt, something that is the reason that we want to work toward freedom and work toward the greater good is to alleviate that pain, is to bring justice so that it alleviates that pain of oppression and exploitation. And so there's something about the pain element and that humanness that I feel like was universal, but still applied to the overarching push of the month. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I think that's great for two reasons. One, obviously in this conversation to try to have empathy for.
Yeah.
And there's something really remarkable, I think, in the Christian faith that we're anchored by a hope that transcends circumstance and it
Right.
transcends even the grave. That's the great promise of Christianity, that there'll be a
Mm.
resurrection and all
Hmm.
things made new.
That's right.
And so we long for a day when that's accomplished, not through our effort, but because God will make it so.
Right.
That's a great hope of
Hmm.
Christianity that is very distinct from secular humanism that says, hey, we're going to get better and better and better and
That's
work
right.
harder and harder and
That's
harder, and
right.
we can make this thing right.
That's right.
The Christian confession is strange because it says we can't.
Hmm.
And we have to sit with that confession that there is a brokenness that does go so deep into the very fabric and fiber of
Yeah.
creation
Yeah.
that pain will be a part of the story.
Yep.
But then it turns, and the Christian faith rests and is anchored in a hope beyond us
Hmm.
that says that's not the final word.
That's right.
And so we have both. We have the pain, but
Hmm.
we also have the future promise of a hope that will rise us up and get underneath that burden and lift it. So, first,
That's
just
right.
if you're feeling the pain of any circumstance, just know that it's okay to acknowledge that because it's real. And the
Right.
Christian faith doesn't try to make that less. It doesn't
Hmm.
try to erase that or to placate that and say you're not feeling that. No, the Christian story says, no, it's not the way it ought to be,
That's
right? There's
right.
something about your feeling of brokenness where you're saying that's wrong. It's not the way it's supposed to be. And injustice as deep as human trafficking, we can look right at it and say no to it.
That's right.
And we can feel the pain of it, but then not be cemented underneath that burden.
Mm.
We can know that something will lift us up. So
Hmm.
that's why it's good for us because of human trafficking to think about this, but also just to have time like this. I think to be honest there's pain like that pressed down in our stories.
That's right.
So I think this poem's going to help us
Yeah.
do that. Let me get out of the way.
Well,
Prayer, and you
yeah.
could.
And I'll just tell you quickly about Christian Wiman. I discovered him in actually a book of prose that he wrote, My Bright Abyss, which I think you handed me
Mm,
when we first met. It
yeah.
was a while ago, but so I was first introduced to him through this beautiful book that he's written. Um, but he's been a poet for many years. He's written a number of books. He's a professor at Yale Divinity School. He's taught at Stanford. But one of the things that you'll discover if you read My Bright Abyss is that he was diagnosed with this bone cancer that was just debilitating and
Mm.
excruciatingly painful. And while they told him he didn't have long to live, he just kept living. And so it created this thing where you're living with this insufferable pain for so long. I mean, I think it's been 20 years
Yeah.
since his first, something like that,
Mhm.
diagnosis. And so I think when he writes his poetry, and there is that moment where it touches pain, it touches anguish, it touches the agony of this condition, of some of this brokenness. There's this realness to it. You can just sense the gravity of what he's been through
Mm.
that brings this very authentic voice to that subject matter.
Yeah.
And so when we found this poem, again, it's just called Prayer, a very, very short poem. I think that it is an offering of not just, I've been through this too, the Lord has been through this too, but also like there is a relief, I think, in being able to name the suffering and
Yep.
being able to walk through that and sort of name it and share in it. And something about that can alleviate some of it.
Mm.
Like I actually had a friend who went through a really, really tough time and then had a really horrible injury and then got re-injured
Mm.
and sent out this SOS prayer request. He's like, I'm filled with anxiety. I'm filled with despair. This is my trigger. Like this is my most sensitive point. And we all sent prayers and I sent words of encouragement and I sent him this poem.
Mm.
And it's like a poem. I feel like it is like a salve.
Mhm.
It can be as like a gift that I think he's giving to us and we can give to each other and hopefully share it on this podcast
Yeah.
as an offering as well.
Thanks for highlighting a bit of his story too. I think that's so
Yeah,
important too. That's part of, again, the remarkable nature of the Christian faith is that God would take on flesh and identify with us in our
right.
weakness,
That's right.
so that when he speaks words to us, they're words spoken from feeling what it
Mm,
is to be in that condition. And when anybody does that,
that's right.
and they speak from a place of such deep authenticity
Hmm.
that they say that this pain, you know that they feel something of what you have felt
Right.
and they're not distant from you. And I
Mm,
think that's what I
that's
love
good.
in that God has come near, not just for the hope that comes, but to identify with us in our sufferings. Because sometimes when someone looks at you and says, "Oh, you too,"
That's
I
right.
know what that is. It gives an affirmation that only somebody who has felt something like that
Yep.
can give,
That's right.
and you're seen.
That's right.
And so I think he gives a beautiful gift. My Bright Abyss is a wonderful read
Yeah.
for anybody
And
looking.
and he struggles with his faith. I mean, some
Yes,
people
in a
think
real
he's
honest way.
not a believer because
Yeah.
he has trouble with the resurrection and other things. And, God knows his heart, but the one thing he does do really well is that he's very critical of the fact that some theology, because we have really condensed and squeezed everything into a tight corner of intellectual understanding. We're leaving out people who might be a lot closer than they think.
Mm.
We're leaving out a lot of people whose hearts are very expansive and open to the things of God, but maybe can't fit into that tight little box that we've created with
Mm.
some of our theological pursuits. Obviously, not all of them, but we have really kind of um, lost some of that expansiveness, some of that intuition, and some of that other things. He's very good at naming. So I think his faith is refreshing that he's so honest about where he is. And I think he's able to reach people who might not necessarily, he calls them unbelieving believers,
Yeah.
like the
Yeah.
people that are like right on the cusp and they don't know where they fit in, but they have a lot of pull towards the things of God.
Yeah.
And I feel like he's a good voice for that group.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and so timely right now in our moment too, that that's not uncommon to
Yeah.
probably a lot of people listening, like us, who have traveled through places where the things of the intellect or the theological
Mm-hmm.
presuppositions that we know to be true, and they're truths, and
Mm-hmm.
we can say yes to that. And then we've come to understand that God is beyond our way to solve some of these things. And so
Right.
that we have truths that you look at them and you go, I don't know, that doesn't seem to be my
Mm.
experience yet. Or
Mm.
I'm still trying to believe this particular thing. Help me in my unbelief.
Yeah.
And I think that the more you come to know God, the more you realize that he's deeply okay with, Lord, I believe, help me in my
Right.
unbelief.
Exactly.
And so if you're a believing unbeliever, or
Yeah.
if you're in that wrestling place, there's room. Like I just love the compassion of
Me
God.
too. Me
And
too. Although I do keep running into these intellectuals who seem like they're so brilliant and they're in these intellectual circles. You know, I'm thinking of like Jordan Peterson,
yeah,
who come just to the precipice of belief, you know, and they kind of get it and they kind of understand, but they can't get all the way past like things like the resurrection and these things. Whereas just speaking for myself, maybe I'm just not that intellectual. I don't know. But I feel like it is intellectually satisfying
mm,
that a God who made everything, who made life itself, could rise from the dead. I don't find that to be intellectually. In
yeah,
fact, it intellectually satisfies me because he is God, that it would go beyond my thinking.
yeah,
Sort of the three in
yeah,
one in three, the Trinity, also intellectually satisfying because it's not.
yeah,
If that
yes,
makes
yeah.
sense. you
And
know,
to
like,
the reality of knowable and mysterious
right.
can both be true at the same time, right? Like there's
Yeah.
things that his ways are not our ways.
Right.
He's ineffable. There may be aspects that you can't reconcile in our intellect
Mm-hmm.
when we see only the material side of this reality.
Right.
And God, like Lewis says, absolute being who comes into time and space, there's
Mm.
going to be some
There's going to be some,
expansiveness
yes, and some
there.
question marks that we are just left
Yeah.
with, you know, and that, yeah,
But what I love about intellectual curiosity is, in the Christian faith, is that
yeah,
there are answers,
that's
and
true.
there's a trail that you can find. That's why we
Mm-hmm.
love beauty and goodness and truth. Beauty draws you in to say
Mm.
something is there, and it
Right.
seems to be deeply good.
Mm.
And you can have confidence that, and I'll come to know that it's true.
Mm-hmm.
There is a reality to it, an actuality to it.
Yes.
But sometimes that's a journey. That's a long, slow, deep walk.
Right.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
That is okay.
Agreed. Agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's good.
It's good.
Especially when you come to things like suffering. I mean, this is the quintessential
True.
problem that a lot of people come to with Christian faith or with any faith in God. They go,
Mm.
how can it be? If
Mm.
God is good, why does he not reach in
Right.
right now and alleviate this suffering? How
Mm-hmm.
could a good God allow for that?
Mm-hmm.
And you hear it in the pain of words
That's
like
right.
this.
And usually I remember Tim Keller handling this question and he would say, oh, I usually say, I don't know. But then I turn to the gospel and I say, this good God who allows it, I know that he stepped into it.
Yep.
I know that he didn't spare his own son. I know that he has a dog in the race, you know,
Mm-hmm.
that he's in it with us.
Yep.
And then somehow the need to know the other thing really diminishes, doesn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, in relation
100%.
to that truth, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I'll read the poem and then we can talk about it. But this is called Prayer by Christian Wiman. I'm sorry, Christian Wiman. For all the pain passed down the genes, or latent in the very grain of being, for the lordless mornings, the smear of spirit words intuit and inter, for all the nightfall neverness inking into me, even now, my prayer is that a mind blurred by anxiety or despair might find here a trace of peace. For all the pain, I mean, just that the first four words, for all the pain passed down the genes. This is where we start our descent down. All the pain passed down the genes, the familial trauma,
Hmm.
the disease, what we inherit, what we're born into, their circumstance, the personalities, the lack of love, the deficit, the people who are still operating out of their own pain, the wounds that have not healed, and those that have cared for us. All that pain passed down the genes. And we try as parents, right? We try to like deal with our own stuff so we don't pass it down, but you can't get it all.
Yeah.
All the pain passed down the genes or latent in the very grain of being.
Mm.
Again, so we've gone down, and I'm imagining grain like seed. So we've gone down, and it's only a matter of time. It's latent in the very grain, the very fabric of our being,
Mm.
that eventually that pain seed is going to crack open.
Mhm.
Eventually, some form of it. It's latent in the very grain of being. For the lordless mornings, lordless, they're out of control. They have no sovereignty. They seem to have no master.
Mm.
They seem to have no lord over them. They are chaotic or without order, without someone watching over, without sovereignty.
Mm.
Even the sovereignty of God, when you know God's sovereign over your pain,
Mm.
that can make all the difference. But the idea that you have a lordless morning.
Mm. Before you go any
Yeah.
further, I want to stop just for a second. I love how you started just for all
Yeah.
the pain,
Yeah.
all of it.
That's right.
And for this is part of has been a journey for me with human trafficking.
Yeah.
When I try to think about this pain and this brokenness, and I see it here in the victim, we just had this conversation with Stephanie Freed and her team working with rescuing young girls and young boys in
Mhm.
Cambodia, and just the numbers and the circumstances she was giving. My attention turns toward that survivor of that trauma,
Yeah.
and I see all the pain.
Yeah.
And then I look over here and I see the perpetrator of that pain or a participant
Yeah.
in that pain. And when you keep pressing down, you go, it's passed down in our genes. There's a
Mm.
latent thing in the very grain of being
Yep.
that brokenness is here and it's there and it's there and it's there. And scripture, no one is righteous, no, not one.
Yeah.
And I think one of the great gifts of the Christian faith is that honest assessment of our condition
It's true.
and the honesty to be able to look right at it and say, no, the very problem of sin has pressed down latent in the very grain of being.
Mm.
And it's not culpability or privilege or something else that we're going to make sense of it. No,
Yep.
it's gone all the way down. And until we're able to be honest with that, I don't think we find a trace of peace,
Mm.
because then we're always pointing, blaming, finding the victim and the oppressor. We're trying to
Mm.
square it. And until we can zoom out enough to say, no, it's in the very latent grain of our being.
Mm.
Until we can step back and say that, I don't know that we'll ever find that trace of peace.
Mm.
So I think he does a good job of being really honest of
Agreed.
the condition.
Agreed. And I love how we are going down.
Mm.
Like you said in the beginning with that opening quote, it's this down, this very earthy down into the grain of being. It almost feels like it is in the soil, it is in the air, it is in the water, it is in the genes, it is in the personality, the trauma, like it's in everything.
Yeah. You hear it in Paul when he says, who will rescue me from this body of death?
Mm.
There's an inescapable thing that's with me always.
Mm.
And it's not an intellectual thing that I can say. It's in me. It's with me.
Right.
It is part of the reality of being. And the question is, who will save me from
Right.
this? Because it's so latent in our being.
That's right. And you're right, somehow having that moment of confession of reality, confessing, saying what is true about the human condition eventually leads us to our problem. And then we understand the solution that God is providing, but we can't get there without stating first the grain of being, the
Mm.
problem,
Mm. Yeah.
as clearly as we can state it,
Yeah.
that this is our collective condition.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And the smear of spirit. I love that line because it's so surprising.
Mm.
What? A smear? Like, is this passing thing that you get kind of a feel for it, but it's gone? It left a smear. It's already gone.
Mm-hmm.
And then even if you do catch a little spirit of something that might be good, something, your words now are intuiting it and interring it, burying it. Like whatever that smear was,
Yes.
it's already buried and now you're already your words are already climbing over it and making it into something that can now be buried by your intellect.
Mm, mm,
For all the nightfall neverness.
yeah.
Hmm. Hmm. The nightfall neverness inking into me. And so we do have the two like ends for the alliteration, nightfall neverness, and then inking into me. It's just this very, so few words are being used, so sparse.
Mm,
But I am having such a visceral feeling of that nightfall neverness. And now we're getting into this sense of like a non-existence, a perpetual feeling of non-existence,
yeah.
of not being present, not having vitality, this nightfall neverness. And it's inking into me. So again, with the down, it's like coming down into me through my pores, through my world, through my thoughts. It's inking into me, this black ink,
Mm,
kind of, corroding into me.
yeah. And I think we've all felt that too, that inking into me is such a beautiful way to say
Yeah.
that of like, it's it's not just in the mind. Again,
Right.
it's inking into me. And
Right.
I love how he says,
Yeah.
even now while I'm reflecting on it. And I
That's
think
right.
that there's that, if you've ever had ink or another dye,
Mhm.
that even as you're trying to clean it, even now, as I'm
Even now.
trying to
Yeah.
contain or clean or
True.
organize, even now it's
Mhm.
ink, it's already there.
That's right.
Yeah.
And he's gone from general. He's saying pass down the genes, not the grain of being, the Lordless mornings. And this is the first time he's drawing attention to the personal, even it's inking into me even now.
Mm, mm,
And I think there's that very present. So it takes us into the present out of this general feeling. And now we're in his present. Like you said, he's saying, even now it's inking into me.
yeah.
Yeah.
All the pain.
All the
All
pain.
the pain,
Yep.
the very grain of our being as a species,
Yep.
all the Lordless mornings, the nightfall neverness, and it's funneling right there and inking into me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it can be that idea that it's coming inking beyond your intellect. We look out, and maybe this is his personal pain he's going through with his disease, but also we look out into the world. This happens to me frequently. As an artist, I see what things could be
Mm,
all the time. I want what they could be. And I want the school system to be what it could be. And I want this
mm,
system to be what it could be.
mm,
And I'm always seeing what things could be. And that's a strength, but it can be very heavy
yeah.
because you realize what a deficit you're really in.
Yeah.
And so this idea that it's inking into me, I feel that sometimes that it starts to become like almost like a corrosive feeling of things are wrong.
Mm,
Like everything feels
yeah.
wrong.
Such a
So,
good point too. I think Seneca maybe said to be wise is to be sad.
mm,
Jesus, a man of many sorrows, he
yeah,
weeps over Jerusalem
that's right.
because he knew, that it's
What it
not the
could
way it's
be,
supposed to
not what it
be,
should
and
be.
then felt what it feels like to have death inking into you when he's with
Mm,
Lazarus, his family, and he's saying, I'm watching grief ink into them,
yeah,
and I'm seeing a city
yeah,
miss the promise,
that's
and it's
right.
inking into the streets,
That's right.
right? Like to
Yep.
be wise is to be sad,
Mm,
to be aware of what ought to be and what is promised is to have some sorrow.
that's
And
right.
I think that we have to reconcile that, right? Like even on this, in these conversations, people will frequently ask like, oh, so V3, you're about the life and beauty of the gospel. And there's even been challenges, you're about the life and beauty of the gospel. Do you not see the other side? And I go, no, 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 no,
Mm,
no. The Christian faith is able to have both of those things within it.
yeah.
And Jesus did, but the lived experience of that is to bring a child near and say the kingdom is yours
Mm,
and have joy like that and yet weep over a city. And that's why we talk about all the time, we come back to commingled. The
yeah,
reality is just it's good, it's broken, and there's a future.
that's
But
right.
to live that embodied reality, I
Mm-hmm.
think you make a good point that there's an exhaustion, there's a
Yeah.
weariness that comes with that. And maybe just pay attention to that as you enter January, because I feel that. We
Yeah.
said prior to recording, like it's strange sometimes because you want sheer optimism, like, oh, it's a new year. set our goals, declare our intent, set our intention, whatever it is. And then you go, I can't even now, as I say that, it's inking into me.
Mm,
And it's both.
that's right.
Yeah.
That's
No, it's
right.
good.
No, yeah. And that's why I love the miracles that the Lord chose to do when he walked the earth, was to show us what it really should be.
Mm.
Always reversing the disease, always healing the sick, raising the dead, not to show us what is supernatural, but was actually natural.
Yes.
This is natural to
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
And I love that. I love that is that is, he's doing these things to show us that restored the world to its natural order.
Yeah.
And I feel like we're always hungering for that. We're always yearning for that. We really always want heaven. We always want that in every single zone that we're in. We have that yearning, and that's a very natural yearning. We just have to be patient with what we have until we get it.
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know?
Well, and how beautiful that is, right? And how beautiful and trying to have a foretaste of what is to come,
Yeah.
right? No
Yeah.
eye has seen, no ear
Yeah.
has heard, no mind has understood like what
Mm-hmm.
God has in store. Like we don't even have the language for the colors or the tastes
I
or the
know.
joy, right? Like to feel
True.
free of all the inking in.
Yeah.
We don't know what that will be like, but we can imagine a
Mhm.
foretaste with these little miracles, these little joys.
That's right.
And the invitation then is to say, okay, what if as we wait for that day
Mhm.
that we can begin to participate with that, right? In
Yeah.
alignment with what ought to be. And I think that's what moves us to action when we think about human trafficking. We're
Yeah.
not paralyzed.
Right.
We're not paralyzed just to simply look at the brokenness and then look at the future and then go, well, we don't know what to do with both of them, right?
Mm.
And I think that's why it's a way of suffering, because you're entering into something that is still a distance off and you're walking in the direction of your hope.
That's
And
right.
that's going to be costly.
That's right. And not to get on too much of a tangent,
Yeah,
but
yeah, no.
I think it does serve us really well to be clear about the thing that we're hoping for
Mm,
and to imagine with what we've got from the scriptures, what that future hope is. To live out of it, we have to really imagine it. I was listening to a sermon and the pastor was saying, you know, a lot of people think of heaven as this disembodied cloudscape where they're going to have fat baby angels on the clouds and nothing going on. And that's been the societal imaginary
mhm,
regarding heaven, regarding the new heavens and new earth. It's just a disembodied spirit on a
mm.
cloud. And how is that supposed to give you hope? How is that supposed to anchor you? And is the scripture really putting that forward, that vision, or have we just inherited that?
Yeah.
And so I think we have to get a real grasp on what that new heavens and new
Mm,
earth is
come
from
on.
what scripture is giving us
Yep.
and really allow ourselves to live in that hope.
Mm,
Allow
yeah.
ourselves to imagine and to enjoy a future hope now.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's what you talk about intellectuals. C.S. Lewis being a heavyweight intellectual and Christian intellectual and surprised by joy gets to, it's almost as if Eden has come again.
Mm.
Standing at that in this beautiful park-like setting and saying, I get it. It's this and yet transposed, or
Yeah.
the transposition. It's this, but taken up an octave.
Mm.
And once you get that, there's joy to the cooking, joy to the ordinary, joy to the things,
Mhm.
because they're not so distant. It's
That's
not,
right.
we have this life and then we have fat baby angel life. Like, it's
Right.
not going to be so dissimilar
Right.
that we can't make sense of it. It's this, but taken up an octave.
Yes.
Come on.
Yes.
That does give you courage.
And maybe that's the invitation when I'm seeing everything the way it could be and it's not, is to say in those moments, oh, can't wait for this to
Oh, transpose it.
can't wait for this to get, it's day.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. Wouldn't this be good? And I can't wait to hear it done this way.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
I think this is what dispenses in some way or pierces that shadow of death that hangs in the valley. When you get that glimpse and you go, there is more beyond.
That's
There's
right.
infinitely more, further up, further in. And so I don't fear death, because death will be that water I pass through. But on the other side will be that transposition of creation. And I will experience something that is more, not less.
Amen.
And that
absolutely
is a
true.
Christian reality, that it's more, not less.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm still, go back to the cold floor and then knelt in the church, praying
Yeah.
at the altar, the poems we've traveled. I'm
Yeah.
still wrestling with that, but it does give you hope when you look out at that
That's right.
bright abyss and say,
Mm,
no, but there is something beyond.
that's
So
right.
yeah, no, I love even how what you just said will take us to the turn to where there is a trace of peace. So
That's right. So he says, even now, my prayer is that a mind blurred by anxiety or despair might find here a trace of peace. So we've gone down. We have gone down the genes, grain of being, smearing spirit, words interring, burying that smear. We've gone into nightfall neverness, oblivion, and just non existence, or at least some kind of place without possibility. We've gone all the way down, inking, down, down, down. And then trace of peace rises up like a little sprout at the very end. Might find a trace of, there it is,
yes.
the new life.
Yeah.
There it is sprouting up from all this inking neverness down, a trace of peace.
Mm.
And anxiety is fear of the future, fearing what's coming, and despair is just is that utter sorrow for, as we've described for many good reasons. Might find here a trace of peace.
Mm.
And again, with the consonants like trace and peace, it just has this even sweetness that we've changed the language. We had smear and we had despair and prayer and grain, and now we have trace, peace.
Mm.
And I just love those two notes that it ends on, because again, that is my prayer. Is that
Yeah.
like that trace of peace would rise up out of the darkest of our moments.
Yeah. And again, not fat baby angel peace. Like
No.
peace is such a powerful and potent word in
Yeah.
Christian theology, the shalom,
That's right.
the peace
Wholeness.
of God,
That's
peace
right.
with God, peace within yourself, peace with your neighbor, peace
Amen.
with creation, like this
Mm-hmm.
holistic reconciliation of all things.
Yes.
That's the potency of peace. It's not like a flighty word or
Right.
like a pastel word. There's a deep potency to peace.
That's right.
I think blurred by anxiety too, if I can just say, as somebody who wrestles with anxiety, I love
Mm-hmm.
that what he said about blurred by
Yep.
anxiety. The anxious mind, that feeling of it's blurry and I can't make sense of it anymore. I'm now blurred by anxiety.
Yeah.
If you live with that you're not alone. I think you're right in
Mm-hmm.
saying we're looking out and there's blurred by anxiety.
Yeah.
And then back is this despair of like, we'll never get out of that cycle. But I've felt both of those things. I loved how he said that, blurred by anxiety.
Yeah. And I like it too. You're right, because it does affect our vision.
Yep.
You can't really see clearly when you're like completely overtaken by fear.
Yeah.
You can't see as clearly, and then that also can be disruptive. You're blurred and you can't see as clearly, and you know that your vision is a little off because of the fear.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so he's saying that blurriness, the trace of peace is so clear. Even that the sound of it is clear.
Yeah. I love this. Thank you for this poem. And with National Human Trafficking Awareness Month and all the work from the Lab Initiative, what Christina's working on, and Riley curating these conversations so
Yeah.
that we can keep wrestling with this and then keep pointing to the good work being done. I loved how this came to my prayer is that a mind,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And maybe that's somebody who even now is saying, I was a victim of sexual abuse or sexual
Yeah.
exploitation, and I've never told anybody. And so my mind is blurred with anxiety. I
Yeah.
live with a despair that there's something that's inked its way into my being, and
Mhm.
even the people closest to me don't know it.
Mm.
Right? And I love how this poem says, my prayer is that a mind that is wrestling with that, or the worker who is working really hard to end human trafficking
Yeah.
and stop the exploitation of children, comes home and goes, we weren't able to fund our budget. And my
Mm.
mind is blurred with anxiety and in despair.
Yeah.
That mind, a mind, no matter where you are, or that maybe all of us, again, the purpose of these conversations this month is maybe
Yeah.
just to say, like, till up the soil of empathy and the capacity to feel that sorrow and pain that's pressed down and be able to look right at it. Because if
Yeah.
we can't do that, I don't know that we'll be moved with compassion as Jesus was. Like, he was moved
That's
with
right.
compassion because he knew what that felt like. So it's good sometimes to have a poet help us get closer to
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
pain. So thank you. This
He-
is really, really well done.
Yeah, he's really aware of that too. I was listening to a couple of interviews by him, and like I said, I read his other book of prose and essays. He really does think that poetry has that way of helping us to expand our grasp of reality
Yeah.
itself.
Yeah.
And he is warning very much against, well, you've mentioned this on the podcast many times, the interiority of ourselves. He's like, there is a wild attack against the interior life of people. They do not take the time to know what is in their own heart. Everything is externalized.
Mm.
And poetry is one way that can help you. He's like, there's many ways, but I mean, that is one way that we can stop and have that moment of connection to awaken something, to make sure it's like an act of resistance almost against that numbing
Mm.
and against the the just distancing from pain
Yeah.
and from not really entering into another person's pain. We
Mm.
have to like almost actively resist
Yes.
this cultural push against our interiority, against that interior life.
Yes.
Is it's strong.
Yes. And thank you for saying it again on the threshold of a brand new year and all of the conversations about rapidly scaling AI and quantum
Yeah.
computing and like getting better and faster at being able
Mm-hmm.
to skip steps, right?
Mm.
And not travel through all of those layers
Right.
upon layers. There's something that is happening in the disembodying of that compassion, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is the capacity to suffer with.
Right.
And so if I haven't felt that, I
Mm-hmm.
can't join you in that. And
Right.
if I skip that, right, and externally come to some knowledge of something out here, but I
Mm-hmm.
haven't felt that, or there is no interiority that has been introduced to that or
Right.
uncovered that, then I can't be truly compassionate. And then again,
That's right.
this complex thing of participation in may your kingdom come and your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. We're not going to make it true, but right now there are literal children in captivity.
Mm.
There are kids who have been the victims of sexual exploitation and sexual abuse that need art therapy in these centers that
Wow.
Stephanie Fried talked about. There's Created. There are all the different ministries here working right here in Tampa Bay or in your
Mm-hmm.
city or in every port city where people are doing incredible work with aged out foster kids. Like, this is good work being done, but we can't grow weary in doing good. And part of that rising again comes from the unsettling of a deep compassion that is able to feel this and then go, that's what will make me move to someone else who's in their deep brokenness. If I don't have that, I'm not going to move. It's too easy to
Mm.
be numb.
Good.
Yeah.
It's good.
Yeah. Will you take us back through it?
Yeah.
And again, this conversation went all sorts of different ways. I love that poetry does that. But if
Mm-hmm.
you're listening to this one and something that we talked about pressed an area of your heart or mind or life and you kind of don't know what to do about it, I think that I'm just mindful that some of these things that hurt so bad, sometimes the people closest to us don't even know, and we don't know what to do with that.
Yeah.
I would just say, again, we love the local church, and I'm an advocate for reaching out to great counselors and friends and the people in your life. And if you don't feel like you can turn in any direction, there's an open invitation to reach out and message us, and we'll help you find somebody in your area that you can talk to and work with. And we just say it on all our platforms, but you're not alone
That's right.
in these things. So if this did bring something up in your story, just know that you're not alone, and that's okay. And we encourage you to take that next step and like let someone meet you with compassion in that. You don't have to travel that alone. But this is
That's right.
prayer. Would you take us
Prayer.
back through it?
For all the pain passed down the genes, or latent in the very grain of being. For the lordless mornings, the smear of spirit words intuit and inter. For all the nightfall neverness inking into me, even now. My prayer is that a mind blurred by anxiety or despair might find here a trace of peace.